Let's bring in, look who's here, former Labor Secretary nominee Andy Puzder and the Wall Street Journal's Bill McGurn. Gentlemen, good to see you both. Let's first listen to former President Trump with Sean Hannity. He's talking about President Biden and the problems facing America. Watch this.
I think he's in bad shape physically. Do you remember when he said, I'd like to take him behind the barn? If he took me behind the barn and I went like this, I believe he'd fall over. I believe he'd fall over. Nuclear weapons are the biggest problem we have, and we have a man that can't put two sentences together. We have a man that doesn't know he's alive. It's Biden inflation. That's what it is. What he did with energy is unbelievable, because energy went up so much, gasoline $5, $6 a gallon, that's what caused inflation. Now it's all over the place, but you have 29% total inflation. So when it holds up, he's saying, well, we don't have too much inflation, but he doesn't talk about all of the inflation that you've had to suffer over the last 3 years.
Andy, that was quite a performance. Your reaction?
Well, it made me laugh the second time I heard it. It was a great presentation. I think the biggest danger we have in the next election is that Joe Biden won't be the candidate. And I think that Donald Trump's comments, if anything, would encourage him to run, would encourage him to stay in the race. I'm a little concerned that Republicans want to impeach Biden. I think they should leave him alone. Biden's the candidate. He's the guy the Democrats should run, and we should stick with that. I thought his comments were very good, particularly on the economy.
Yeah, on the economy, he's saying on day one he would do border security. Bill, I mean, if Trump stays on message about policies, can he win?
Well, that's a big if Trump stays on message. I don't think Donald Trump has ever stayed on message. It's working for him now. He's way ahead of other Republicans, and he's even leading Biden several polls. So we'll see whether it's welcome. But
he was staying on message. He was staying on message last night.
Yeah, he was. And I think we haven't seen enough of this from the other candidates, focusing on Biden and what's wrong with Biden and why Biden needs to go. They snipe at each other, and that's a big issue. That's what Republican voters want to hear. How are we going to get rid of Joe Biden?
And they want prosperity. They want, basically what Larry was just talking about, more optimism, Andy. They don't like what's going on with border security and the collapse under Biden at the border. They don't like the fact that they're dealing with stagflation right now, Andy. We've got that Republican debate coming up. And, the media and Democrats are stepping up attacks on Trump as a, quote, dictator. But look at this. The Supreme Courts have been ruling against Biden for doing sweeping executive actions going around Congress. We're going to show you what Biden has been doing. What do you think, Andy?
Said if you read those articles where they accuse Trump of being going to be a dictator when he gets in office, the things they accuse him of doing are the things that they've been doing over the past 8 years. I mean, that Democrats always think that when Republicans get power, that they're going to do what the Democrats would do if they had power, and it's an incorrect assumption.
So what do you think, Bill, here? We had GOP conference chair Elise Stefanik. She wrote an op-ed for Newsweek that the Democrats are using, quote, unprecedented lawfare to knock out Trump because they can't beat him fairly on policies.
Yeah, I agree with Andy. One of the things that came out of the last days of Trump administration was how many people in his own party, his own administration, wouldn't follow some of his crazier schemes. I think the real menace to freedom is on the Joe Biden side. We look at what the FBI did. Look at what the intelligence agencies did. Look at what the 51 intelligence officers, former intelligence officers, were willing to sign to get Joe Biden elected. And look at the censorship. I mean, if we're worried about dictatorship, there's a lot of evidence that suggests it might be the Democrats that are the biggest concern. Yeah,
what do you think of that, Andy? Because, Representative Stefanik says the left has chosen lawfare, multiple indictments of Trump, also that New York civil fraud case to take his business away. They're saying, yes, Trump is winning in the marketplace of ideas. It's not working for Democrats, their policies. They seem to support limitless open borders, inflationary tax and spend policies, and the unconstitutional silencing of opposing voices. I mean, we're in stagnation, Andy. That ADP job report for November, 130,000 private sector jobs, October was, downgraded to 103,000. What do you think?
Well, I think we better hope that the inflation slows, that these jobs come down a little bit. We've seen the JOLTS report came out, job openings are lower, because if the Fed has to raise interest rates anymore, the federal government, there's going to come a question as to whether or not the federal government's going to be able to pay its debts. And if the interest rate gets so high, we're already paying about $1 trillion in a quarter in interest, which is a year in interest. And it's a tremendous amount. It's a tremendous drag on the economy. It's a tremendous drag on the government. And if people no longer believe that the federal government can pay its debts if the interest rates get too high, that's when you have that nuclear event that people keep talking about economically. So you've got people talking about an economic nuclear event, about World War III, about an open border. No wonder people aren't happy.
Got it. Andy Puzder, Bill McGurn, thank you for joining us.